Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to have a very interesting conversation, and I'm looking forward to you meeting my guest today. I have a request. If you value our show and view it as a safe space to share your stories, please do me a favor. Go to Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts, search for Diversity Connects Us, and share your review and your feedback. This keeps our audience engaged. Also, I get to see what topics you enjoy the most and create more of that for you. I have something else for you. To support my work, I want you to go on Amazon. I have written 2 ebooks, Emotional Intelligence, a toolkit for managing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the second one is called Know Yourself to Know Your Employees. Please leave a review. It will only cost you a cup of coffee. My name is Rochelle Carrier. I'm an EQ coach and authoress, and I help develop inclusive workspaces through an emotionally intelligent lens. This helps boost inclusivity and create a harmonious workplace environment. EQ is always the bridge to DEI. Join us as we share with the different voices in the DEI space. Welcome, Kayshawn and Dr. Rudell. So happy to see you again today.
Yes, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for having me, as always.
So, for the audience, I love everyone to give an introduction of themselves. Uh, yeah, Kayshawn, if you'd like to introduce yourself and let everyone know who you are, what you do.
Sure, thank you. I'm Keyshawn Hughes. I'm a certified neuro coach and neuro leadership consultant, and I founded an organization called Neuro Savvy Leadership. You can see it, my logo here, right? So we help people be more neuro savvy about how their brains and nervous systems work so that they can show up and be their best selves, so they can feel healthier and happier at work and in life in general. And so we do that through consulting, workshops, speaking, and coaching. And I've just found my passion, found such a wonderful space in this community of coaching and consulting and sharing this neuro leadership information has been just such a wonderful blessing to me. And I love sharing it with others.
Oh, that's awesome. And you're going to be sharing some nuggets with us today as well. Yeah. And Dr. Rudell, can you introduce yourself, please, and let the audience know, who you are and what you love to do?
Sure. So my name is Enid Rudell. I am an organizational psychologist by trade, hold a doctorate in organizational leadership psychology with a focus in the neuroscience of leadership. I am a director of the Inclusive Leadership Concentration at William James College for the doctoral program, a senior consultant with IBIS. IBIS is a corporate global DE&I firm. Prior to entering into org psych spaces, I spent a number of years as a therapist. And I think for me, that's how I stumbled onto emotional intelligence. And for me, EQ has been a concept that I've pretty much based the majority of my work on. And so I am thrilled about the conversation that we are about to engage in today, and just grateful to be here with both of you.
Yes, same.
Oh, thank you. It's so wonderful. I want to start the conversation with self-awareness. And I know that's what our series is about. And this is part one of our probably a few series that we're going to have conversations about. When we think of self-awareness, and I'm going to throw it back to you guys. When we think of self-awareness, what is it about self-awareness that people need to know or that leaders need to understand? I'll leave it to any of you to answer that.
I'll let you go first.
No, no,
Oh, well, the first thing that comes to mind, if you've ever followed a person who was not self-aware, then you know exactly what self-awareness is and why it's needed. It's like a sensory experience that you can have when you're communicating with someone, wanting to connect, wanting to engage with a person who lacks self-awareness. Um, it's the will and skill to see ourselves clearly, and we have to have an inside view of what that means, and then also an external view of that. So receiving feedback, so that we can have that connected, holistic experience of who we are, how we show up, and how others are experiencing us. So that's how I would describe self awareness.
I love that. I love that. And I think for me, how I make sense of that concept is on a physiological level. What is surfacing for us in any given moment?
Mm,
How are we feeling? What are the thoughts that we're having? How are we reacting to what's going on around us? And I think that for me is where sort of um, the importance of self-awareness lies. Understanding that the better that we can understand what's happening for us,
mhm,
the more likely we can engage fully
mm,
uh, with whomever we're engaging with in that moment.
mhm,
I love that. And I think we need to go like a little deeper because I hear that there's a feeling that surfaces, right? So when the feeling surfaces, we actually have to be in tuned enough to be able to sense the feeling and not overlook the feeling.
mhm,
And I think that's what we do. So if there's a feeling of worrisome and we don't address that feeling, then it compounds and then other feelings surface and then we don't address it. So I think what's important is also for us to be able to, we have to pause.
Yeah.
I think Enan and Kayshawn, you had mentioned that a
mhm,
while back, is
mhm,
pausing. So, because
mhm,
when we don't pause, then we cannot fully be aware.
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah. That's that's
Absolutely.
that's so true. And listening to you, I'm thinking of cognitive behavioral therapy and my time as a therapist, and how, as a framework, I still use that to this day in terms of visualizing for myself the connection between my thoughts, my feelings, and my actions, and understanding that essentially how I'm framing a situation, my thoughts related to that situation are going to have a direct impact on how I feel. And by extension, will show up in my behavioral pattern, right? So I think really being in tune and aware and creating space to just pause and understand all of that. Like for me as a practice, I've actually sort of embraced the idea of not reacting, not being less reactive
Mhm.
and more thoughtful
Yeah.
around how I want to show up in the space and how I want to react.
Mhm. Such great nuggets that are shared. There's so much that's coming to mind for me. And going back to what you first said, Enan, about just being in touch with what's happening moment to moment, I think of presence and
Yeah,
just being present from
yeah,
moment to moment. And so much of our society, responsibilities, our culture is about not being present. It's about being future oriented, possibly ruminating on the past. But we're taught, I would say, I learned how to not necessarily enjoy and savor and be in touch with what's happening from me with me from moment to moment. And that's so powerful. There's so much data that can be collected, and then that can allow us to frame those narratives that you're talking about, like the internal dialogue, being aware of what's happening in the moment as it's happening. Where is this coming from? Um, how can I show up in a way that would be the best response? So you say reactionary.
yeah.
How about if I was more responsive? How can I respond to this stimulus, this moment, this person, this conversation in a way that is the most suitable for this present moment, that will
Mhm.
also have the best results over time?
Yeah,
I like
absolutely.
that.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead. Did you want to say something, Enan?
No, no, after you.
Yeah. Yeah. I lost my train of thought, but
Mhm.
it just came back. So
Present.
now,
Oh, self-awareness in practice. Yes, there it goes. Yes.
right, we're practicing. I think, the pause
Mhm.
helps us not be reactionary.
Yes.
Mhm.
The pause
Ooh.
allows for that emotion to sink in. So,
Mhm.
heart is palpitating from anxiety, let's say,
Mhm.
or hands are balmy from fear of doing a presentation before a wide audience, and realizing and accessing that information and acknowledging that that is the feeling that is occurring at the moment,
Mhm.
so that it can just calm the nervous system a little bit. Because I think when we're thinking of the future, oh, it'll be okay, it'll be okay, it'll be okay. And after the present, we still haven't addressed the anxiety,
Right. Yes,
right?
absolutely. That
Yeah.
snowball, that layering, like you were saying, Rochelle, that it just, if we never process it, metabolize it from moment to moment, we're human, we're busy. I can say that we won't be perfect at it, but as much as we can, just acknowledge, and then I would say label what's happening with us internally,
Right.
giving it a label, and then learning how to just be with it, be with that feeling, that sense, and not try to suppress it or um, just ignore it, because it will just grow and get bigger. Because it has to tell us something. It's there to show us something, to tell us something. Typically, just that will be supportive, and many times,
Yeah.
if we can just give it a voice.
I'm thinking of a strategy that I use that isn't rocket science, but I've had a lot of success with it, and I've learned it. I learned it actually from one of my mentors. Back in the day, I used to have a bad habit of just firing off emails when I was feeling some kind of way, right? And I've conditioned myself: draft the email, you put it in draft,
Mhm.
you give it some time, a few hours if you can,
Mm,
right? Or maybe even a day. And
mhm.
I can share that the majority of the time when I went back and looked at that email, I'm like, oh no, I can't send that. And I have to go back and sort of write, because I think what I did was I captured my reaction
Mhm.
in that moment, but now I'm viewing it from a less emotionally charged place. And so I think for Rachel, your listeners, in terms of highlighting action steps, because oftentimes people say, okay, what can I do on a day to day, right? So we're talking an awful lot about the pause. I
Mhm.
offer up that example as what the pause could look like.
Mm,
Uh, another context I'll offer up is I used to encourage people, if there was a conversation that they wanted to enter into that felt difficult and or challenging, boil your talking points down to 3 or 4 bullet points, right? And it increases the likelihood that the conversation is going to stay on track, and you'll be able to deliver your message in a way that will likely be heard. I mean, of course, it's contingent upon the other person, but in terms of offering up strategies around sort of that self-regulation piece,
mm.
yeah, taking time to sort of mentally, actually, the actual step, the way I had it worded was mentally practice what it is that you are going to say.
Yes, I love that.
Mhm.
I love that.
Yeah.
When you say mentally practice, so to rehearse
Mm,
what it is you're going to discuss via those 3 bullet points.
mm,
Is that what you mean, or
Mhm.
to practice it as you're doing it?
I mean, it could be both, to be honest. But I mean, I think what that strategy is getting at is thinking about. Um, Here's the thing: when we are in a place where we're emotionally charged,
mhm,
right? We have all these thoughts. Our mind can literally be flooded. We're angry, we're upset, we're remembering stuff from last year, 5 years ago, whatever it is. The idea of practicing keeps us in the moment,
mhm.
and sort of says, okay, listen,
Mm,
I don't
present.
want to talk about 5 years ago. I don't want to talk about last week. The
Mhm.
point of this conversation is these 3 things, boom, 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 right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm. That's so important. It's something that I coach people on, particularly when they do have challenges with public speaking or going into an important conversation, thinking of work related conversations about promotion opportunities or career steps that they want to take. Just being able to practice it with someone, have an empathetic, trusted supporter, having that accountability. Like I was saying before, self-awareness is both external feedback and the internal data that we have. And so being able to marry the two gives us a more connected view of how we can go into conversations and how we are managing ourselves moment to moment. So I love the idea of practicing and practicing with someone, if it's a therapist, if it's a coach, a one trusted friend, mentor, advisor. Something else that I've done over the years that's truly helped me be more present and be more aware of how I speak and how my tonality is something I've been talking to some really good girlfriends on a video chat for years through the pandemic. And I've been able to see myself on video, to see how I react and respond to information that's shared with me. And maybe not consciously, I don't consciously, I would say, speak in a certain way because they're with my friends. This is a trusted group of supporters. But I definitely think on a subconscious level, it's made me more aware of how I come across to others. And so those types of things, video chat, seeing how you are on video, being able to see what you look like and how you sound, listening to yourself on audio, recording voice notes. That's another tip that I give people, to say something on voice note or on a recorded audio, and then play it back to yourself so you can hear how you're sounding as you're sharing information and wanting to come across and speak to those 3 points that Ian was mentioning.
You know, I realized there's a client I coached a little while back, and she was journaling. And I remember she was very self-aware, so aware of all her emotions, you know, during the situations that, you know, she was facing in the workplace and outside of the workplace. And journaling allowed her to actually put her thoughts on paper. And like you were mentioning with the voice notes or speaking to someone to get feedback, and like Enan was saying, you can actually go back and look at it. So she would go back, read what she was saying, and then like Enan was saying, you know, you put it in the draft. So she literally closed it. And then when she was in a better frame of mind, she looked back at it and thought, oh, this is how I was feeling, but this is how I'm feeling today. And then we were able to break down steps as to why it was she was feeling the way she was feeling at that particular moment, address the situation to be able to elevate her to go to the next level.
So powerful.
It is. It can be really powerful to reflect on how we're showing up. And I know with the email example, the times that I've went back and seen what I was about to say, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about myself.
Let's keep it that way.
You know, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about myself, and you know, I think that there's so much value in just pausing before we react, and we can even do it real time too. I was thinking of a strategy that I used to encourage people, and I use it myself. It's actually always fair game to not enter into a conversation if we feel like we're going to enter in and no good's going to come from it, as in like, we're going to enter in and say or do something that we're going to regret. It's always fair game to name that and acknowledge that and say, you know, I'm not in the best space right now to have this conversation. I do recognize that this is a conversation that we need to have. I'm going to ask if we can, you know, table this, you know, until, right. And again, just to offer up some framing and some phrasing that people might consider, you know, because I think sometimes we feel pressured to respond, and we don't have to.
That hypervigilance, that urgency to always be on it, starting my day with my checklist of everything I want to get through, and emails are coming in, messages are coming in. I want to respond so I can get back to my checklist. Very oriented in that way. I had to learn that taking up space, so pausing, is actually an example of taking up space. And as a woman, as a Black woman, that was a new experience for me, because I felt like in a lot of spaces I was expected to shrink, to cower, to be quiet, to be silent. And so asking for more time, clarifying to people that know me in conversation that when you send me a request, when there's an invitation being made of me, I might take 24 to 48 hours to respond, just as a general practice. That's a boundary that I've set up for myself to allow my own body, my own physiology to go through whatever it needs to go through to be able to circle back to the invitation, to the request in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. I could feel different at each of those times. And so collecting data along the way to then make a decision, to make a choice, and to share in a way that best reflects my values. So that's something else when it comes to self-awareness. I know what I value. I know what is important to me. I know how I'm best to spend my time and how I can show up as my best self. I know what those qualities are. Self-aware leaders should know those things. They should know what their strengths are, what their best value, what their best qualities are, and what their values are, so that when they do respond instead of react, it's an alignment.
Yeah.
Right. I think self-awareness also comes with boundaries.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And we learned that. Well, I actually didn't know what the word meant until a couple of
Me
years
neither.
You too? I know.
Yes, it was like completely new to me. Yes,
New.
new.
So it's interesting because let's talk about text messaging.
Yes.
So we're in corporate spaces, and text messaging can happen at different times for different people because they have different schedules, or they might be in a different time zone.
Mhm.
And I remember finding myself text messaging or responding to clients, or when I was a teacher, to students up until 9, 10 o'clock. And that internalized a little bit of frustration in me because I realized that I was never shutting the clock off.
Yeah.
But I felt I always had to show up to respond because, again, it was like you were saying, respond right away. And over the last 4 or 5 years, I'd have to say now, most oftentimes my phone is turned off. If it's on, it's because I know someone was about to call me, but I shut down, and it's a boundary. It's a boundary so that I can have that minute to replenish. You see what I mean? And I think once we realize, and again, it comes with the self-awareness, because I was aware that I was burning out. I was aware that I was exhausted, and I didn't realize that I had to put a time where I said, like you, Kayshawn, I'll respond in 24 to 48 hours. It doesn't need to be that minute or that second or at night. See what I mean? And I think that's something that we really need to be made aware of, to know that the boundary comes with being self-aware.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of the trickle down effect of leaders that are aware. And there's a few, in considering the business case, right? Like, why should leaders consider the value of self-awareness? There's employee productivity, job satisfaction, and I want to say job retention. Right? So areas that are directly impacted by the leader that can show up in a way that's self-aware and create that emotionally intelligent space that people need to be able to feel valued, respected, and to essentially want to do their job at the highest level that they're capable of doing it at that time. So, I mean, I think that there's a lot here when we talk about awareness and why it matters, and how it actually can affect organizational culture at a high level.
Absolutely. It brings a little bit of, it allows for a more, less toxic or more positive and enhanced workplace. Now, I have a LinkedIn user here, and they said, "Good stuff, guys. Pausing is so potent, but we're not taught that pausing is foundational to us being aware of our thoughts, feelings, and actions. I think it's because pausing can feel uncomfortable because we have to be with ourself. So
Yeah.
it ties into self-love. What do you guys think? I know we switched topics, but I really wanted to address this comment.
I love the idea of self-awareness being a type of self-love, an expression of self-love. I
Yeah.
love that. It's so
Yeah.
powerful. Pausing is kind. You know, when I think about love, the word kindness comes up. I think about, as you were talking about organizations and the trickle-down effect, it creates a sense of psychological safety. We're humans. We're humans. We're imperfect. We have all kinds of emotions throughout the day. We have a lot of things that are expected of us. But when we can pause, it's a way for us to show ourselves some kindness, show others kindness, and then impart, be in that love practice. That I love that idea. That's what I took from that quote. That's so good.
Yeah. That's such a powerful connection. I'd never framed it.
No, I love that. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I think on some level, sometimes it's like we keep ourselves busy so we don't have to pause and reflect and think. Because I think one of the challenges is once we're aware of whatever the issue is, we now have to do something about it. So
I know. That's where the work begins.
right. So it feels on some level almost like a subconscious, maybe a defense mechanism to
Yes.
not be aware, to
Ooh.
not pause, to just keep going. Because the moment we stop and pause, we essentially might be opening up floodgates for some feelings that we haven't processed yet. We see this all the time when folks have trauma histories and they keep going. They just keep going instead of stopping, pausing, making meaning of it, and doing the work to get themselves to a better place. I think that actually ties into what we're talking about here. And I want to go back to this comment around self-love. I love that. I had never, that is a brilliant way to frame pausing. So thank you to the user that offered up that comment. Appreciate that.
When you say defense mechanism, I just think about the fight, flight, freeze mechanism.
Yes.
When it comes to our nervous system response to stimulus, to information, to experiences, people. That's a way for us to defend ourselves. It comes from a space of fear. And so I can see us being afraid to become self-aware, to acknowledge what's before us, what is within us. But that's why I go back to doing it with support. Don't do it alone.
Yeah.
Having and cultivating that trusted community, starting with yourself, becoming a trusted community of one. So can you at least not acknowledge it to yourself, maybe in your private time, in your journal, in ways. There are people that self-edit even while journaling. I can remember being that way, right? So I don't want to write it. I don't want it to be real, but it's already real. It's already there.
Yeah.
So just being able to do that and find support in doing that, I think is so key. It's so key for us to talk about. We can be so rewarded for being just individualized, and this whole pulling our bootstraps up, whatever the phrase is. It's not even sensible or logical. I've never seen a bootstrap being pulled up. I don't even know what that comes from, but we know what the phrase is and the term is. It doesn't make sense. We're communal as mammals, as human beings. We need each other. And so self-awareness practice is best done in community with trusted and trustworthy people.
It's interesting. And that also helps build, and it's probably going to be another conversation or another series or another part of our series, self-confidence.
Ooh, love that. Yes.
Because once you have those building blocks, then that creates your foundation for your belief system, for your value system, for families, for friends, and you become the best version of yourself because now you have that community supporting you in that journey that allows you to be sure and certain of where you're going to take your next steps, because that community has been there to help you. And I think that cultivates the self-confidence in us. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Wow. It's making me think about culture. And the Neuro Leadership Institute defines culture as our shared everyday habits And so as we develop habits as individuals that are then supported in community, we begin to share those habits. And those are the building blocks. When you said building blocks, I think about building towards culture. So building beyond me, building in a way that's connecting and that's flourishing and nourishing for myself and others. A self-aware culture, like a culture of self-awareness. I'm thinking about our society's culture. I would question whether it is self-aware in large part. And the moment we begin to become self-aware, I feel like you can feel like you're excluded because you're beginning to notice things, you're beginning to put voice to things that others possibly would shame you for or deny or say that's not so, gaslight you for. So there's that too, the exclusion that can come when you're coming into your own self-awareness, the being different potentially in comparison to the cultures you find yourself in, whether it's a familial culture, your family, your community, your work, things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. I was still practicing at the start of the pandemic therapy, and I had never seen. I'd been practicing for years up until that point. I'll say this: when the pandemic caused our society to pause, it's as if the volume got turned up on our own thinking. Right. And so the distractions went away because simply stated, they weren't available to us. So it became like the first time in years where we had to face some of what we were running from. And I'm just remembering this now, the divorce rate within the first 6 months of the pandemic, it skyrocketed because people were using work as a distraction. They were using whatever it was as a distraction. When all of that went away, and we had to sit with ourselves, that may have been one of the most powerful sort of, self-reflective moments in modern history.
I agree.
I agree. There's someone here. Oh, I think it's my cousin, Andre Guillaume. He says, I would take it a step further to say that self-reflection requires training. Perhaps the gateway could be through meditation, but a roadmap usually would be helpful to reach that level of emotional intelligence. With no training, it could leave you with a sense of being inadequate in dealing with yourself, therefore lowering the self-confidence.
Wow.
So I appreciate that, and I think it's spot on, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many folks I would give mindfulness techniques to in session, but I would sit with them. We would work it through. We would sort of, in a sense, practice it. And I used to say to them that it might take some time for you to be able to connect with this approach. In fact, there's other approaches out there. We might have to play around with deep breathing or various forms of like mindfulness exercises to find the one that's the best fit. But I think that it absolutely takes a measure of practice. And it's not something that, it's actually far more complex than I think most of us realize. This being self-aware, you have to first recognize the value of being self-aware to want to even engage with the process of being self-aware. If that makes any sense.
It does. For me, I had to do it for my health. I had reached a burnout state. So you talk about mentioning the overworking. I was not self-aware. I didn't realize that I was behaving and managing my life in that way, showing up and being everything for everybody. I was not listening to my body's own subtle and then more painful responses to my overwork. And so we do need to be trained. We do need support and help. We need wise supporters, people who have that information and experience themselves, who could then take the time to share those types of concepts with us, like mindfulness. In my coaching practice, I invite people to start with very short spurts of mindfulness. I just always think about one coaching client who I just asked her, maybe during her lunchtime, how is it that you can, throughout your day, things that you're already doing, begin to pause and take a more mindful moment. Maybe during lunch, instead of being on your phone and being distracted, just pay attention to the fork going into your mouth, chewing, the swallowing, the tastes and sensations that are happening. And she could only do that for 30 seconds at a time. Over time, she built up to about a minute. And that minute of mindfulness every day had a lasting effect in how she showed up at work as a leader. She was a manager. She was able to be with people and their discomfort for longer periods of time. And so it's something that neuroscience coaching and training has taught me, that we can just take very small steps towards being more self-aware, being more mindful, because it can create such a sense of discomfort in us. And I invite people to ask themselves, is that discomfort harmful or helpful? Discomfort is discomfort, and the brain will treat it as such. But being able to discern, well, will this sense of discomfort, being mindful for these 30 seconds as I'm eating, will it be helpful to me over time? Do I believe that it will? Do I believe what Keyshawn is saying, as Enid said, Dr. Rudell said, and that if I know the value of self-awareness, if I can just move towards that mark, if I believe that, can I allow myself that time for even short spurts of time and do it consistently for great results?
And on a physiological level, what does that do?
Changes your brain. It increases more gray matter. It makes your prefrontal cortex, this part right behind your forehead that has a lot of your sensors for empathy, for motivation, for your executive functioning, makes it stronger. And so over time, people have been able to see through brain scans of 6 weeks of mindfulness practice for 5 to up to 15 minutes a day can change your brain. It's called neuroplasticity. It can change for the better at any age and stage of life. We always have the ability to grow and to improve and become better.
Our conversations, thankfully we made it into a series, because I think we
Yes,
can
so much. Yes, absolutely.
we could drop so many nuggets. It's been such a pleasure. Keyshawn, how can the audience get in touch with you if they need to reach out?
Thank you. I would love for people to get in touch with me. I play around mostly on Instagram and LinkedIn, so find me at NeuroSavvy on either one of those platforms.
Dr. Rudell, how can anyone get in touch with you? You know, you're also in the spaces where you're practicing this, you know, on a daily level. Do you do keynote talks as well?
I do, and I would offer up the best way to get in touch with me would actually be through LinkedIn, and I would love to continue the conversation further with anyone that may want to learn a little bit more about strategies, techniques, best practices, whatever it is. But I just want to underscore a point that, Rochelle, you made a moment ago. There's so much here for us to continue to unpack as we sort of think about the value of awareness through the lens of leadership. And I know that we're sort of talking about leadership, but what I love about this conversation is that so much of this applies to all of us in our day to day. And I guess that the last point I'll make is that, you know, some of us are leaders by title. Some of us are leaders by positioning in our families or amongst our friend group. So it actually, I guess I would encourage listeners to think about leadership in a broader context as we have this conversation.
So good.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. As we reach the top of the Diversity Connects Us hour, I want you to show us some love on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts. Stay tuned as we continue to share our voices in the DEI space. To reach me, you can also find me on LinkedIn or at hello@seqconsulting.co. To trend with us, #Diversity Connects Us. Thank you so much again. It's such a pleasure.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.